Good morning and welcome back to day 2 of the California Creamery Operators Association annual meeting. Our panel this morning is Inside Washington, What to Expect from the Biden Administration and a Balanced Congress. I'm Darren Montero, Vice President of Member and Government Relations with California Dairies Incorporated. I actively participate in regulatory and sustainability activities on behalf of membership and the cooperative in Sacramento and Washington, D.C. Prior to joining CDI, I spent some time with the Farm Service Agency, with a branch of the USDA, and before that, working on my family's farm in Fresno County. Today's speakers, Congressman Jim Costa, Jaime Castaneda, and Chip English. Congressman Costa represents California's 16th Congressional District. He has served the San Joaquin Valley in the U.S. House of Representatives since January of 2005. Prior to that, he spent some time in the California legislature for 24 years. Congressman Costa was born and raised on a dairy farm in Fresno County and is a third-generation family farmer. As a member of Congress, Costa has applied his farming background in fighting for valley water, agriculture, and the economy. He is also the founder and co-chair of the Crime Survivors and Justice Caucus and chair of the Livestock and Foreign Ag Subcommittee. Jaime Castaneda is the Executive President for Policy, U.S. For National Milk Producers Federation. He is responsible for leading National Milk Producers Federation a number of domestic policy initiatives. In addition, Mr. Castaneda provides government relations and advocacy for the U.S. Dairy Export Council. He leads the U.S. dairy industry in international trade negotiations. Jaime also serves as a private sector advisor to United States Trade Representative Ambassador Katherine Tai and the USDA Secretary Tom Vilsack on advisory committees and regularly provides guidance to administration on a number of policy issues. Chip English, partner in charge with Davis Wright Tremaine. Chip English navigates and maximizes his clients' success as affected by governments. He focuses on practical advice with the goal of minimizing risk while valuing reward. This means he understands and finds a creative and legal way to the client underlying goals where other lawyers might simply say no. He thus concentrates his practice on complex commercial litigation and regulatory matters for business and trade association clients, especially in food and agriculture. Chip has represented clients before multiple state and federal agencies, especially including the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and the New York Department of Ag and Markets, and the California Department of Food and Agriculture, where he has obtained numerous favorable rulings and results. He has also appeared successfully before the U.S. Supreme Court, in addition to arguing regularly before a number of trial and appellate courts. So we'll start off the conversation with Chip and Jaime. Congressman Costa will be joining us shortly, and when we do, we'll move over to him. But so our first question for Jaime and Chip, can you provide a brief overview of the current state of affairs in Washington from your perspective? And we'll start with Jaime.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having us and having the opportunity to be in such a historical event. I have the pleasure to be here. It's too bad we're virtual and not in Lake Tahoe. Let me start by basically laying out the situation right now in Washington, D.C. As you all know, both the Senate and the House, but especially the Senate, is incredibly divided. We have 50 senators for each side, and the Democrats have majority only because they have the White House. On the House, as you know, the Democrats actually lost a lot of seats last time around, and now the margin, it's extremely close. So what this all means, my former boss used to say, Washington D.C. is a cluster funk, and he's right in many times, but we have seen a rate of sunlight, especially if you look at on the Senate side, some of the joint work by some of the members, especially in the Senate Agriculture Committee. Senator Stabenow and Senator Busman, they're actually doing a lot of good work, and one of them is this climate bill that just passed, and it was very significant. The partnership, the bipartisan in which this was done. The other thing is that infrastructure. As you can see, I mean, obviously there is an opportunity for compromise. I know that actually we are all hearing that it is one day it is, the next day we don't know if it's going to happen. My sense is that it will happen. The infrastructure is something that will get to the desk of the president, and certainly it will not be necessarily attached. We still have to hear Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, but I think that this is something that those senators that compromise will come forward, and it will be too bad for anybody to miss that opportunity. With respect to the administration, you know, the administration is doing what they think we all think that they were going to do, which focus on a lot of labor issues and environmental issues, a lot of the sustainability for us that it's impactful. Not so much on all the trade issues, and we're going to talk more about that in a little bit. But I would say that right now I have hope that unlike the House, in which certainly the perspective is that that is going to still be very partisan, and each party is going to do what they think is best from a political perspective, to not work with the other side. I think that the Senate will bring potential bills that could benefit the country as a whole. Let me stop there, Darren, and see what Chip has to say.
So thanks, Jaime, very much, and thank you, Darren. And of course, I too, like all the other speakers, thank everybody for this opportunity to speak today, even remotely, which is nowhere near as interesting or as fun. I enjoy doing this very much. Anybody who knows me knows I like talking, but I also like listening, and so I like hearing from Jaime and Darren and from the congressman. So the second thing I'm going to say, anybody who's heard me speak at one of these knows what I'm about to say, and that is, I am speaking today for myself. I am not remotely speaking for any client or even my law firm. This is Chip English speaking for Chip English. So I absolutely agree with Jaime. Let me do a few nuances, if I may, or go off on a few nuances, and say that, you know, first of all, the reason the Senate Ag Committee can work this way is that this is more traditional. Agriculture tends to be something that crosses party lines. We have a long history of bipartisanship. Only recently have we seen farm bills, you know, that are much more partisan, and it's really not the farm bill. It's usually something extraneous to what we could think about as being the farm bill. So the good news department is that, you know, we've got people talking to each other, and that, from my perspective, is the most important thing. I have to agree with Jaime. I'm not so sure whether that'll work out in the House, but I think that the Senate can show real leadership on ag policy and show us the way. Second, speaking more specifically about dairy, I think we're in a good time frame for ourselves, and by that I mean it has certainly been the case in the past, and I'm thinking of the 1990s up until around 2008 at least, where dairy interests collided in ways that were not helpful for us to get things done. You know, as we're talking about the closeness of the Senate and the House, as we're talking about people talking and bipartisanship in ag, it's important that as many of us be on the same page as possible. There were times in the 1990s especially where some of us would go up on the Hill and we would say the words dairy, and you know, almost be like the doors slamming on our faces that people didn't want to talk to us because it was so acrimonious. You had producer fighting producer. You had producer organization fighting producer organization. You had disputes. And let's face it, our system is complex enough that understanding it is hard. So I think that we have a unique opportunity right now because there's been a lot of turnover, and a lot of the people who felt that way about dairy are no longer in the Senate or the House. And so that provides us an opportunity moving forward. And finally, sort of from an administrative perspective, we also have, and to my knowledge, first, we have an ag secretary who has been directly connected to the dairy industry during his interregnum, the time period between his two positions as secretary. And I think that presents a unique opportunity. And I'm of the view that one seizes unique opportunities. So that's what I have to say about the state of affairs in Washington. But I primarily agree with Jaime.
Thank you, Chip, and thank you, Jaime, for your perspectives on kind of current affairs. I'm going to jump right into a question that I've prepared for Jaime while we await Congressman Costa. But Jaime, Congress has scrutinized kind of recent trade agreements. With your background, particularly in areas of labor and environmental conditions, to the point where we're now hearing reports that TPA is kind of dead on arrival. So with the importance of trade to the California dairy industry, how can we influence fellow congressional leaders to support kind of further global access, much like USMCA?
Thanks for the question, Darren. And it's too bad that Congressman Costa, and so I don't embarrass him, I would say that if we would actually have 100 members like Congressman Costa, our lives would be a lot better. Let me just start by saying something that maybe many people that doesn't know, but we haven't negotiated and passed a new agreement through Congress and signed by the president in more than 10 years. I mean, that tells you a lot. It's a little bit like, we can talk about federal milk marketing orders, and the last time that something comprehensive was done was 25 years ago. So on the trade agreement side, I don't count USMCA. Sure, great. I mean, we have a more up-to-date NAFTA. But that's not a new trade agreement. New Zealand has been negotiating trade agreements with
Looks like we've lost you a little bit, Jaime. Well, we'll wait for Jaime to come back. Looks like he's having some technical difficulties, and also looks like Jaime, you back?
Yeah, I don't know what happened. I checked my internet. Everything seems to be okay. But you hear me okay now?
Yes.
Okay. So I think that you lost me when I was basically saying that, we need actually more action with respect to trade agreements. So that's a given. Everybody knows that. So I actually a lot of times told my friends that were frustrated with the previous administration actions regarding trade that listen, you may be also frustrated with this administration by in the other side by the lack of action. So the problem is that when we look at trade here, we look at trade from two extreme positions. And what we certainly need and want is to actually have those members of Congress. I always point that we had like 28 or 29 members of the Democratic Party on the House voting for TPA. I mean, that tells you a lot. So what we need is to have an understanding and a better working relationship when it comes to trade. And this is a little bit of what Chip was saying. We need the Senate to provide leadership. We need the administration to submit the TPA requirements. We continue to hear from the administration that they want, to evaluate all of these things. They are talking about how trade agreements have not benefited workers. Well, personally, I don't share the view of some in the current administration that argue that these trade agreements haven't helped workers. In fact, all the economic evidence shows that trade have benefited United States consumers and workers. And it's the irony of all of this is that if you look at who the United States have the biggest trade deficits, it's actually with two countries / region that we don't have a trade agreement with, which is China and the European Union. So that what it tells you that. So a lot of this is rhetoric. It's actually lack of education. And unfortunately, a lot of these folks come from urban areas, and they don't understand that trade agreements have benefited a lot of those folks that actually work on services and other areas. So the only thing that we have left for us is do a lot of grassroots efforts to have members like Congressman Costa push the administration, because that's the only way that we're going to get through the next. So this is not necessarily a Democratic issue, a Republican issue. We have had both, and we have not seen progress on free trade agreements. Let me stop there, see if Chip wants to add anything on the trade side.
Well, no, that wasn't my question. I thought I was going to get, but I think I obviously agree. I agree with you, Jaime. I think that, listen, we need trade. We know we need trade. Think about the volume of product that we produce in this country, in the dairy industry, that without the export market would have to be disposed of otherwise here in the United States, and what impacts that would have on the entire industry. We moved away from a support price system where product was bought by the CCC and put in caves and sometimes catch on fire, to a system where we're actually producing powder to sell in the international markets. And we now have we have people putting together and constructing new non-fat dry milk facilities, not to sell milk to the government, but to sell it to our foreign partners. And what a valuable way to go, and what a terrific thing to do. So that just spells it out. If without trade, can you imagine if we had no trade agreements? Can you imagine if we weren't able to market our dairy products internationally, what the impact would be on prices in the United States?
Well, unfortunately, trade is kind of hitting somewhat of a roadblock currently, but hopefully it doesn't become as partisan as, say, something like immigration reform, and we can continue to move some trade agreements and TPA through this administration and this Congress. But it looks like we have two questions in the chat. Looks like Jeff Vanden Heuvel was reading my mind, and kind of a precursor question to you, Chip. But if you could get Congress to pass kind of one thing with regards to dairy, what would it be? And I would like kind of both of your insight on the question.
Well, I think your question to me was if I could be king for a day, what would I do? I'm not sure I'd want Congress to be involved. I started in this back in 1985 after the 85 Farm Bill, and I think it's safe to say Congress created a lot of chaos with the 85 Farm Bill. And I'm not sure that when we go to Congress, we end up getting, what we really want. If I can sort of riff off of what the question was from you, Darren, I think there's some things we forget. And the first is just how valuable Federal Marketing Order data is that we get. It's audited, the underlying basis for a lot of dairy product price reporting, the data on regional production of dairy products, and so much more. And none of us in this room can remember a time when all that incredible data was not available to us. We heard from Phil Ford yesterday. Yes, some of that data comes from other sources, but a lot of that data comes because of the federal order system. And so I think we underestimate the value of the federal orders that Congress has authorized through the AMAA and the data that we get. Second, and this goes maybe to Jeffrey's comment as well, is what are federal orders not designed to be? And, I know there's not 100% agreement on this, but I think USDA would agree with me that they are not designed to be price enhancing or provide a safety net for dairy farmers. And that's often misunderstood. So if I wanted Congress to do something, I'd want it to look at the trade agreements, I'd want it to look at the safety nets we have, because that's outside the scope of federal milk marketing orders. And the third comment I would make before if you want me to take on your comment now, or I can take it on later, but regardless, I think we don't always get, and maybe most of us don't get, how valuable the personnel are at USDA Agricultural Marketing Service. They do an incredible job. And they do it when we have these disputes, sometimes between dairy farm organizations, oftentimes between dairy farm organizations and processor organizations. And yet they do a masterful professional job at working with the federal order system. We may not always agree with what they do, but I think we can agree that they have the best of the dairy industry in their hearts and minds when they're doing it. And let me assure you, that is not uniformly true throughout the government. Those are my preliminary comments.
If I may add, Darren, to Chief's comments, I certainly I would agree that I think it's better to not look at it from one thing, right? It's like to Jeff's question about if you could get Congress to pass one thing. I certainly, if I can have only one thing is trade, because I do believe that trade benefits all dairy farmers, and even dairy farmers that maybe in Georgia or Florida that may think that trade doesn't impact them. I would respectfully disagree. I think the more product we put out, it's going to benefit every single farmer in the United States. And one of the things that sometimes people don't realize is that we're going to keep producing milk. I mean, and your farmers understand this very well. I mean, we're probably the most productive farmers out there, and we're going to continue. So for those that they don't want to see that trade as a critical part, I think that the horse left the barn a long time ago, and we just need to do better. And this is why your first question was so important. With respect to federal orders, it's not something that you can do just one thing. It's as we were talking before, it needs to actually look at it in a very comprehensive way. Because what I always say is that I think a lot of people don't talk about federal orders, and I'm not one of those handful of people that understand federal orders in its complexity, but I do know that both farmers and processors have flourished under the federal orders. I also know that if you know about it, when I came into the dairy industry in 1999, we used to actually export 4% of our total solids. I mean, we have gotten to months in which we have export 18% of our total solids. I mean, and we have done that under the federal order. So I don't understand sometimes when some folks out there say that actually, federal orders is preventing us from exporting. So I think that what it is important is that, we haven't looked at the federal orders for 25 years. So I think just look at the make allowance survey. It's taking forever to actually just have it. So I think that all of that, but at the end of the day, I would say I would go back to trade.
Thank you. The next question in the chat, with our recent administration change and with the addition of Secretary Vilsack, how do you think Washington views dairy's role in climate policies?
Do you want to go first, Darren?
Jaime, go ahead.
Well, I think Chip pointed that certainly the secretary has a history with dairy, but I think more importantly is that, and the Secretary Vilsack, I had the honor to work with him for now 3.5 years, and I think that he will be the first to tell you that he's much better prepared to be in the position that he is than he was the first time around. And I think that in itself is going to tell you a lot. And I think that, what the Senate just passed, I think it's also sends a message. We need to actually just work a few issues, concerns in the House, because we're going to have perhaps positions, and I don't know if they're going to have, I assume that they will have a different bill. I think that David Scott, the chairman of the House Act Committee, and G.T. Thompson, the ranking minority, are working together, but we'll see what comes out. I do have faith that I think it's going to be something that is going to benefit dairy.
If I could maybe turn the question just a little bit and think about what education we can do for those people who don't get it. And I feel very strongly about this, that, I mean, there are people out there, obviously, who make wild claims about dairy in a negative way. And when I hear those, I say to them, do you realize what terrific stewards of the land dairy farmers are? Do you understand that it is in their own economic and best interests to do the best they can with the cows and with the land and with the water and everything they're doing? There's not a vested interest of any kind in dairy farmers causing pollution, destroying the land, or doing anything that some of these wild theories have about dairy. And I think Secretary Vilsack, because of that work that you've been able to do with him, Jaime, and the work he's done, and I think that we as an industry are doing a better job there, but I think we can always do more. And I'm just proud to be able to work with the dairy industry, because I know just how much people do and how hard dairy farmers work to be good stewards of the land and of the air and of the water. And I think that we can be a very positive role in climate policies, because frankly, when you think about it, all the things the dairy industry is doing is a net positive.
That's great. It looks like we have another question in the chat. What are the prospects for getting the Farm Workforce Modernization Act passed? And we'll start with you, Jaime, and if you guys can give your perspective.
Well, that's right. I was going to make a joke, but better not. So I'm not a betting person, but I am an optimist. I have always been an optimist, but I'm a very impatient person. So, I have actually had so many times that I have been disappointed about anything on the immigration side. I have from the Senate in 2013, in which we pass it, and then the House not even took the bill, not even their own bill. So my message to dairy farmers is, look, you can never lose your faith. You can never lose optimism that this may be the year. So from our perspective, we work from that view, that we're always going to be this close to get it passed. We had a conversation with, and the other day there was a group that got together with Senator Bennett and Senator Crapo and Secretary Vilsack. I think that there is a sincere interest. We go back to this climate bill with infrastructure. I think that there is a sincere approach by some members. The only problem that I see as a strong conflict to get enough votes is what has happened on the border. We need to have the administration to be more forceful, to be more active, and I think that we may have a chance to get the Farm Workforce Modernization Act passed.
Chip?
Well, Jeffrey's been waiting years for me to say this. I don't know.
That's why they pay you the big bucks.
Well, it's the first advice I give witnesses is if it's a perfectly good answer if it's true. If you don't know, say I don't know. So.
Great. Well, I think Congressman Costa has joined us. If he has, there we go. Congressman, thank you for joining us. And we've had some introductions and some brief questions, but if you don't mind, we'll jump right to you. And if you could provide us maybe a recent or some recent legislative efforts with implications for California dairy industry, and kind of just your overview of kind of how DC is going with the administration change and kind of your insight into Washington.
Well, thank you very much. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Shireen, I don't know if I erase this private chat thing, then will I be able to see everybody else? Because I don't need to have okay, yeah. All right, that works, I think. I can't see the rest of you, but I can see myself. Let me thank you, California Dairies, for allowing me to be a part of this discussion with your panel. Obviously, Darren and I go way back, and Jamie as well. My notes tell me that Chip English is on the line here, and I don't know who else is a part of the panel, but obviously our operators in California I've worked with for many years and have a deep respect for the incredible innovation and efforts to ensure that you remain competitive in America's dairy industry, and that we continue to deal with the incredible changes that have occurred in the last 10 years and the volatility that we've seen in milk products and milk pricing over the last 10 years, and the impacts as we've seen consolidation at every level within the dairy industry. And of course, the pandemic, with the closure of schools and restaurants, turned a very, as I like to say, complex, complicated food supply chain really on its head. And it certainly impacted pricing. And we did a lot of things over the last 14 months to address the impacts of continuing to try to provide food to America's dinner table. But some work better than others. Anyhow, I just want to touch on a couple subjects and then open it up to conversation, if that makes sense. Darren, are you moderating this?
Yes, sir. Go. Feel free to kind of jump right into kind of your insights, and then we'll handle some questions from the group.
Well, as a third generation dairy family and a person who grew up, as most of you know, in the dairy business, I learned a long time ago about the importance of herd immunity, literally and figuratively. And it's too bad that we've had to lose over 600,000 Americans to really put together a sort of comprehensive focus on knocking this pandemic down so that we could reopen up our schools and our restaurants and our economy to get back on track. I think we've had a plan in place now for about 6 months. We've got a lot of success throughout the country, especially on people 65 and older and getting both vaccines. We're still having problems, particularly with the ages of between 18 and 35. We're not out of the woods yet, and I stress that every time I'm in a conversation like this. But we're going to continue to do everything we possibly can. And when we're talking about getting our economy back on track, obviously the infrastructure package is, I think, important, along with the other issues, especially in California, on investing in our water system. This extreme drought has had all sorts of impacts in the West, but particularly in California agriculture. I've got a number of pieces of legislation that will try to deal with the short-term and the long-term impacts of fixing our broken water system. In addition to that, as many of you know, I've been very involved over the last 2 years to get a reliable supply of labor through the Farm Worker Modernization Act. And I think that I was talking with my colleague and friend Mike Simpson yesterday afternoon, and our efforts with our Senator Crapo and Bennett from Colorado to try to get the same level of bipartisan support on the Senate that we have in the House. I think this is a real opportunity to really do what we should have done a long time ago in terms of doing what's right, and at the same time providing a reliable workforce for agriculture. And then trade, of course, is always a key focus. And the efforts that we're having, not only on the container issue that we've engaged with the Federal Maritime Commission, but also issues like shipping our product to markets, and you know, whether it's milk or milk products, or whether we're talking about other agricultural goods. We were able to get the state to move its truck weight limitation up, and we're trying to do that on a federal level to deal with that. And of course, it really speaks to the longer-term efforts of a infrastructure package that I think is critical. We've been living off the investments our parents and our grandparents made a generation or two ago, whether we're talking about water, whether we're talking about transportation, whether we're talking about schools. And I would add today broadband. You know, I don't farm the way my father used to farm. My dad would be amazed by having an iPhone and being able to check on commodity prices and such today. But you get places in the valley, I don't have to tell you, you know, you're up there where our friends with Hilmar Cheese and some of the other, you know, California Dairy Incs. and others that are getting their milk products. And Gushdeen, as we like to say, you know, has a tough challenge in trying to get access to the internet. And that should not be. I mean, just as President Franklin Roosevelt in the 30s during the Depression created the rural electrification effort, because every American ought to have electricity today, every American ought to have access to broadband. I think that's going to be one of the benefits that will come out of this horrific pandemic that we've been living through. Having said that, let me just quickly get to a couple things that I know we're focused on. European Union engagement. You know, we sent out a letter, you know, suggesting to the European ambassador Lambrinidis, who I've known for a number of years when he was a member of the European Parliament, that the inflexibility of the Commission maintaining new entry certification requirements for exports that include dairy and meat is not a level playing field, and we need to address that. We're continuing to engage. We're going to have a group of European parliamentarians here in the third week of July, and this is one of the issues that I want to put on the table to discuss with them. The Europeans want to, deal with steel and aluminum, which the president, I think, was able to make some progress when he was in Europe earlier this month with the G7. But agriculture's got to be on the table. And I've got some thoughts about how we might do that. I chair the Transatlantic Legislators Dialogue that at least twice a year interacts with our counterparts with the European Parliament. And I'm trying to set up a meeting with the Policy Committee with the European Parliament and our House Ag Committee. And they've met with myself and they've met with Chairman Scott. In addition to that, while we think we made progress on the agreement on the U.S., Mexico, Canada agreement, you can have the best agreement on paper, but if our friends, allies, they are friends and allies, our neighbors, are not complying with the what we signed into as it relates to phytosanitary standards, as it relates to issues of the Canadian focus on their own dairy industry and provide a level playing field. I'm still challenging Canada's tariff rate quotas, even though Canada claims that they're in full compliance. We've had a lot of our cheese producers let me just stay with the Canadian effort or focus. There's going to be a panel report later this year. I'm very interested to see what that dispute settlement resolution is on the panel report. But we've got to stay on it with the Canadians because with their supply side management, program in Canada, I think we're at a disadvantage. As it relates to Mexico, we've got a lot of still challenges. I've got cheese producers in the valley in which we're having problems with the Mexican government. As we know, we don't add byproducts in our cheese as they do in Mexico, and the labeling and the entrance of bulk cheese products is a problem for some of our cheese producers. And I've been focusing both with our trade ambassador on that and Secretary Vilsack. And I'll close with that because he and I have a working relationship. Tom and I do that doesn't mean we agree on everything, but when he was last Secretary of Agriculture, and we're trying to deal with supply chain issues and a balanced approach to the products. The food box effort, while it had some success when we had people going to food banks that had never been to a food bank in their lives, clearly there are ways that can be improved, and to not just the food box effort, but also to our food banks that are still a source of trying to provide people who are food insecure. And sadly, we have too many people that have insecurity as it relates to their food supply. I'll continue to engage with all of you on all of the above and some other issues to ensure that California agriculture in particularly, but also American agriculture has a strong voice in Washington, D.C. And I think as a third generation farmer, I'm in a place where I can help provide that strong voice. So that's kind of my report in a nutshell, and I'll be happy to have a conversation and with all of you on how I can do a better job.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, your insight into Washington and being a champion for dairy and agriculture from the Central Valley has been great to see, and it's been rewarding, I think, for the district and for California. But you mentioned a couple things. and one of them being trade and how important trade is to the dairy industry, especially in California. And you've been a champion amongst Democrats for the TPA and for free trade. So how can we influence kind of other Democrats to support TPA and kind of global access for dairy, and to kind of support somewhat like your position amongst your colleagues?
Well, I would go back, and although some of the members are no longer with us, but the passage, was it 6 years ago or 8 years ago? I can't remember, of the Trade Promotional Authority reauthorization. And there, I believe, were 30 plus or minus Democrats that supported that important legislation. Not an easy vote for Democrats because at the time Labor opposed it, although they finally got together 2 years ago in support of the USMCA. I've worked really closely with all of our trade ambassadors going back to Rob Portman under the Bush administration, and Foreman, and our most recent trade ambassador, who I work closely with. But I mean, that's a list I would say for all of you to look at. Look at the members that are still here that are Democrats, because clearly they're supportive of trade if they're willing to take that tough of a vote as it was then. I would also look at the Problem Solvers Caucus and the Democrats that are there, as well as with regards to the Blue Dog Caucus. There's 20 of us there. You'll see a lot of overlap. I think over half of the Blue Dogs are part of the Problem Solvers Caucus, and there are members of the New Dem caucus, of which I'm a part of, that support not only high tech but trade. People like Ron Kine and others, although sometimes he and I have differences on dairy issues when they become regional. But so that would be my best advice in terms of getting more Democrats involved. I think we're starting to get back into a place here in July and this fall where we won't have to meet this way, but you'll be able to come to Washington, and I think setting up meetings that I'll be happy to be a part of as chairman of the subcommittee on livestock and foreign agriculture. I think that's one of my roles and responsibilities. So I hope I answered your question.
Yeah. We will definitely take a look at those caucuses that you mentioned and then those groups and see if we can rally some troops around supporting some trade. One question that I have for you is we've been dealing with a drought. Some may say it's the start of a historic drought. What are your thoughts on how we can solve some of these problems for the future, and maybe through this upcoming infrastructure bill, should one be passed?
Well, every day I'm working on the water challenges facing California, and I've been doing that since I came to Congress. I mean, it's one of the reasons I ran for Congress, because I wanted to continue the efforts on fixing California's broken water system that I was, as you know, very involved on when I was chairman of the State Senate Ag and Water Committee just a few years ago, before I had all this Arctic blonde you're looking at. I don't think, and I'm not patting myself on the back, I'm just, as Sergeant Friday used to say on Dragnet, and I think Rob's Vanderheuvel's father, Jeffrey, would, I think, agree. No one's worked harder and been more engaged on the water issues in California as an elected official, both in Sacramento and Washington, than yours truly. I think that's just factual. But the reality is you can point fingers and you can lay blame, and some of my colleagues like to do that. But I've never found that doing either of those things, pointing fingers and laying blame, has produced one more molecule of water for the agricultural needs of California. These water issues are complex, complicated, and they're always difficult. And more often than not, our successes, I think, have been on hitting singles, and to use baseball analogy, we're in baseball season, and moving runners to second and making incremental progress. In other words, you know, in the last drought, I've been through 4 of the last 5 droughts going back to 77 and 78. And with climate change, I mean, just as we're saying, you know, we no longer have a fire season, we have a fire year. I think these drought conditions, while we'll have average years and we'll have above average years, we measure water in 10-year averages. And I think that looking at some of the studies that have been done at UC Merced and elsewhere in the Sierra Nevada, looking at tree rings, that we've had a particularly wet cycle over the last 100 years, and we've had drier cycles. I think with the impacts of climate change, we're going to see drier cycles. And yet, you know, when I was first elected just a few years ago, we had 20 million people in California. This is my 41st year in elective office. I started when I was 12. No, that's a joke, obviously. But I was younger, and we now have 39 million people. And so when you think about that, we've doubled our population in 40 plus years. And the demands on an oversubscribed water system are clear. And with less snowpack, more rain, we're having to learn to operate our water systems differently than we used to. We need to increase supply. We need to get our groundwater in balance with SGMA. Not easy. We don't get these voluntary agreements worked out and drop the lawsuits so we can utilize the advantages of the flexibility and the new biological opinions. By the way, that Senator Feinstein and I worked very hard to reconcile in 2014, along with the Intertie in 2012, that has brought in hundreds and thousands of acre feet of water that has been shared between the state and feds, between the aqueduct and the DMC. I mean, these are all incremental progress. You know, I've got legislation now that would help fix the Frank-Kern Canal, the Delta Mendota Canal, and the California Aqueduct. I think we've got a good chance to make that happen. 2 years ago, I got finally working with the Merced Irrigation District approval for the raising of the gates at New Exchequer Dam that will provide a 25% increase in storage supply on you know, what is MID's primary source of water once those gates are raised. But these are all part of incremental progress. And so right now we've got to get the voluntary agreements worked out. We've got to get the lawsuits resolved with the biological opinions. I'm working on legislation that would do the seismic retrofit on San Luis Reservoir and raise the dam by 10 feet. We've got Sites Reservoir we're working on. We've got to get that tunnel through the Delta. I mean, these are all part of longer term efforts, but the reality is that agriculture, which uses 40% of the developed water in California, municipal use is 10%, and the environment gets about 50% of the developed water resources. But we have less than 5% of the state's population. And, you know, we've tried to run over folks in the past unsuccessfully. We got to work with everybody if we're going to try to deal with these short-term and long-term uses. But it's a tough challenge. It's difficult. It always has been.
Yeah, very much so. As we start to wrap up here, I'd like to thank all three of you for your insights, but I'll ask for any closing remarks before my final kind of teaser question. But Jaime, if you'd like to kind of close with any remarks, and then we'll follow with Chip and the Congressman, and we'll start with you, Jaime.
Thank you, and it's great seeing you, Congressman Costa. You missed my remark that I said if we would actually have 100 Costas in Congress, we would actually be in a much better shape. I wanna sure, you know I mean it. There was a question on the dairy donation. I don't know if that was answered, but basically to say that that is already on a rule, pending rule in OMB. And I think that we're going to work with everyone, especially with California and others, to ensure that that is not worked out like the family food boxes that disrupted the markets. But I want to thank everybody. I think that actually this is great. I would have loved to have another hour, especially listen to Congressman Costa. And we're going to work together on trade. I think that trade is going to be extremely important today and in the future for dairy farmers.
Well, thank you, Jamie. And let me just say that we should follow up after this with OMB. Clearly, the dairy donation program was created in 1 year for COVID relief efforts. But the benefits have yet really to be realized. And we don't want to see the U.S. dairy market in a similar situation where we saw, as I lamented to Secretary Perdue, and I discussed again with Secretary Vilsack a couple months ago, where the food box program is picking winners and losers. We don't want to see that reoccur. And so you and I should chat, and whoever else wants to be a part of that effort. And and thank you, Patrick Kelly, for saying you miss seeing me. I will take that as a compliment. And I miss seeing all of you, and look forward to working. There is a piece of legislation that Congressman Thompson spoke to me about yesterday that would provide whole milk as a requirement to California schools. And I think, that would be an improvement. Frankly, I'd like to figure out a way, although we have to be cautious or careful, that we could have, I don't want to say California standards, but if we increase the nutritional value of fluid milk, I think that would have a benefit for not only the students, but it would also obviously have a benefit in terms of the milk product. I'd be willing to sit down with you folks to figure out how we could bring the dairy interests from around the country together to see if we could get some agreement on improving the nutritional quality of fluid milk in our schools. I know easier said than done, but I'm willing to engage if you folks would like to do so.
Chip, any closing remarks?
Very quickly, I was going to touch the very same issue that Congressman Costa just touched on. Patrick Kelly's question about the school industry, and first they took away the fat, then they told us to take away the sugar and the flavored milk products, and now they want to take away the sodium. It reminds me about somebody ordering at Starbucks an almond milk decaf coffee. Why bother? And so I think Congressman Costa is absolutely right. Here's a place where processors and producers can and should work together, because let's face it, when school children drink milk, like I did, we drink milk as adults. If you go to school and the milk that is offered is a 0.5% fat, no sugar, chocolate milk, you know where it ends up? We all know where it ends up, in the trash can. And that is a milk drinker lost forever. So this is a place where we should work together and all win.
Well, and on the issues, I'd go even further. The nutrition, I think, is where we can really win. It's just not growing future milk drinkers. But what happens when they throw the milk away is, what do? They go to the soda machine. And, that impacts people who later on become more prone to diabetes, obesity, and other issues that, frankly, are not good dietary habits, plain and simple. So I think this is something we should work on, and you've got my commitment to do that. And there, but let's try to get together. I'm going to be home for a couple of weeks, and then maybe during the August break, we can bring some of our California dairy interests together for a meeting somewhere in the valley and discuss all of the above, and maybe we can have a lunch or something.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. If of course we could have that here in Visalia and at CDI, and we'd be happy to host that. But there's one last question there in the chat, and I think with this panel we'd regret kind of avoiding it. But any thoughts on successfully enforcing proper labeling of real dairy products versus inferior substitutes? And we'll end it with that question and your perspectives first, Congressman Costa, and then other members of the panel.
Well, let me give you a short answer and give you a long answer. Or let me give you a short answer and then an answer to be discussed maybe at our luncheon in August. The short answer, as you all know, I believe, there are a lot of competing interests that make the enforcement of real proper labeling on real dairy products a challenge. You know, whether we're talking about the definition of milk, and of course under the USDA definition, milk is defined as a lactating animal. Obviously, we have a lot of milk products that are in the grocery stores that don't meet that definition. So, you know, I think this is something that, you know, really involves, I think, a deeper dive. It's been a problem for a number of years. It's gotten, I think, more significant in recent years. But I certainly don't have a magic solution on enforcement, because the fact is that there are competing interests that have a different view, as we know. And so we have to figure out how we deal with that. But it certainly has merit, and I'm willing to engage in it. That may not be a satisfactory answer, but it's. I'll get back to how many of us remember Dragnet and Sergeant Friday. Some of us do. Just the facts, man, and that's the facts as best I know them.
If I may, thanks for that, Congressman Costa. But I would say that we're the only country in the world that I know of that we do not enforce this rule, and we allow other products to be called something they're not. There is a reason why, you know, Oatly can use Oatly milk here, but they don't do it in Sweden. Why our neighbors in Canada or Mexico, they don't allow that. Nobody in Europe can do it. So I think that part of the problem is that, yes, there is interest, but it is, I think, a serious issue with the Food and Drug Administration of not enforcing their own rules. And not even enforcing, as you know, now I always bring this, which is just a joke, and it's amazing that, you know, plant-based butter. There is a law, there is legislation that it cannot be allowed for somebody else just to use something like that. And the irony is that plant-based butter is margarine. And margarine sales, as you all know, went to zero. And now they're selling margarine with that plant-based butter. So we need to actually do something more to force FDA. And part of the problem is that we don't have the resources to bring them to court. But I think that FDA needs to act on it.
Well, let's see what we can do, and let's make that part of the subject matter for our conversation. And I like Donna Berry's comments. It's plant-based butter is margarine, and plant-based leather is plastic. Right on, Donna.
Chip, any comments? And
well, not that anybody wants to hear. You know, as perhaps one of the leading law firms that spent the last 4.5 years defending the First Amendment in various respects, And the bottom line is the reason why we're the only country that has this is because of the First Amendment. There have been lawsuits that have been brought about this issue in California in federal court, and the courts have uniformly found, and you're not going to like the answer, but what the courts have uniformly found is consumers are not confused. Listen, I am not representing any of those people on this. I want to be very clear about that. But the answer for Jaime's point about why we're the only country is because we're also the only country that has the First Amendment. And that's what you're going to have to get around. That's what you have to push. And frankly, that's why FDA doesn't want to do anything, because they're concerned that if we do push too hard, all standards of identity could fall. That's a risk.
Well, I will close by thanking all of you for allowing me to participate and for your support, and look forward to trying to get us together here in August and continue to deal with all of the above. And I appreciate our legal experts and advice. For those of you who are familiar, Darren I know is, with the term festa lawyer. Those are the dairymen that on the festas during the season hang out and have cerveza and trabos, and they wax, and we call them festa lawyers. That's the only kind of lawyer I am, because I've never passed a bar. I usually stop and have a drink when I'm at a bar. So anyway, I appreciate the legal advice. I try not to give any, and neither am I a festa lawyer, although I know a lot of them.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you, Congressman Costa, Jaime, and Chip for joining us today. Your insights are valuable to the industry, and we will all keep fighting the good fight, and look forward to maybe seeing you all in Tahoe next June. Thank you.
All right.
I agree.
Thank
Tahoe.
you.
Invite
Bye,
me.
thanks.
Take care. Thank you.